Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your work is really inspiring.
Hey.
and I am personally inspired by your street outreach work. And like I was telling you earlier, that in India at the time, no one was doing it. And I was looking at the videos. I still remember one of your videos where you talked about what all gears to use. And I reached out to you and you guided me on how to go about it. So thank you so much. And today we are here. So I'm really excited. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for having me on. And I've been a fan of your work for a while. I've been following it, since you reached out to me, and the consistency and the content you create has made a huge difference to animals. So I'm also very excited to be here.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for that. I think we are both grateful, I guess, that we are able to dedicate our life to the animals, and of course, no amount of effort that we put in will ever be comparable to the suffering that the animals go through. So I think that also motivates us to push our limit and work harder. So, and I'm sure that you definitely relate with that. I wanted to start here, Natalie, that I've been following your work for quite some time, and there has been a very stark shift in not only your content but also your thought process. So let me break it down as a viewer that earlier you used to do a lot of street outreach and it was very individual focused, right? And now you are associated with pro animal, and you are now shift to a policy level changes, and that is the kind of activism that you do, and that's reflected even in your online content as well. So please walk us through this shift, that what was your thought process like, how, why did you change from a bottom up approach to a top down approach?
Sure. Well, I do want to clarify that I'm not necessarily in favor of a top-down approach. I do consider policy change to be a bottom-up approach
Okay.
because what I do is ballot initiative. So it's basically a group of citizens can come together and write a law, and then the citizens in that city or state vote on it. So it's not the government like making a law and enforcing it. It's
Hmm.
citizens coming together to create the kind of change that we want to see. But in terms of moving more from street outreach and individuals focused activism toward systemic change, it was a long journey. I started animal activism about 3.5 years ago. I made my YouTube channel and I was just doing street outreach, and I think it's a great starting point for anyone. I learned how to talk to non-vegans. I learned the arguments that they're going to make. I improved my social skills. I learned how to use a camera and use a microphone and edit videos. And then I took a lot of that knowledge and I shared it with people like yourself. And I made it more accessible for other people to be able to do the kind of stuff that I was doing, because before it was mostly Earthling Ed, Joey Carbstrong, they had cameramen, they had fancy equipment. I never had a cameraman. I was just out there on my own. And I think lowering that barrier for people made a lot more people comfortable doing outreach and filming it and uploading it to YouTube. And as a result of that, there became a lot more smaller street outreach channels on YouTube. So I felt as if me continuing to make content on that wasn't really what the vegan community needed anymore. We needed more of a diversity of content, people writing essays, kind of tackling larger problems. And then another big shift for me was when I learned about research from this organization called Pax Fauna,
Hmm.
and they did this huge survey on meat eaters and how to talk to them about animal rights. And what they found essentially was that when you ask people to go vegan, it's one of the hardest ways to get them to actually care about animals and want to create change. It's more effective to talk to them as citizens, as voters. And then out of Pax Fauna, an organization called Pro Animal Future started. And luckily, they saw my video about their research. They liked what I was doing. So I joined the team back in March. And since then, I've been a lot more focused on the systemic policy change. But the cool thing about that is that street outreach is a big part of it as well, because you're not just talking to politicians or governors or whatever. You're talking to everyday voters, you're going to the street, you're asking them about the initiatives, and you're having these street outreach conversations. You're talking about, is it okay to eat meat because it's natural? Is it okay because it's part of our culture? You're still hitting those objections. You're just not asking people to go vegan. You're asking them to vote yes on the laws that you're running. So it is a very similar thing. It has just a different ask that you're positing to people.
Hmm.
So I think there's a good amount of similarities. I still do street outreach. I just finished a week on tour with
Hmm.
Allied Scholars for Animal Protection, where I talked to hundreds of students, asking them to go vegan.
Hmm.
So it's not something that I'm against. It's just something that I feel as if other people are doing and can do, whereas my skill set, I think, has moved to something that fewer people have the opportunity to do. So I want to go where I can be most effective.
Hmm. Interesting take. So essentially, what you are saying is that you have taken your skill sets that you developed from your street outreach to the work that you are doing. And also, very interesting, you are still saying that you support bottom up approach. And what you are doing right now is still aiming for a policy level changes. It's just that you're not knocking the doors of the politicians, but rather getting individuals to come together as a collective and work for it.
Yeah, and all they have to do is, check yes on a box
Hmm.
and vote. So it's a lot easier. Like, when you ask people to go vegan, in their mind it's some impossible hard thing that they don't want to do. So you're kind of putting a lot of work on them, even though it's actually really easy. They don't know that.
Hmm.
But when you're asking them to vote, it's a super easy ask. So
Hmm.
they're more likely to do it.
Hmm. Can you give one example of the pro animal, like any of your pro animal projects, like, and what do you do exactly, like the steps, like if you can talk about what's the kind of document that you create that you show to people, and then they are supposed to mark a yes or a no, and how does that affect a change?
Sure. So I won't get too into
Yeah.
specifics because it is a bit specific to the United States,
Hmm.
and only about half of states run these ballot initiatives.
Hmm.
So they happen on the next election cycle. So basically, you write a law and then you get a bunch of people to sign it, like thousands of people to sign it.
Hmm.
And then if you get enough signatures, you qualify for the ballot.
Hmm.
So we had two measures. One was to ban slaughter in Denver, and the other was to ban the sale of fur.
Hmm.
And then in the presidential election, which just happened in November,
Hmm.
at the bottom of the ballot, people can vote yes or no on our measures. Unfortunately, they didn't pass. We were up against a lot of meat industry money, and we didn't run the initiatives necessarily with the intention of passing. It's more about, what can we learn about the meat industry? What are their
Hmm.
weak
Hmm.
points? What kind of, what strategy are they going to put into defeating us? So we definitely learned a lot.
Hmm.
And right now, we're working on creating the policies for the 2026 election cycle.
Hmm. So essentially, you will have your documents, and if you have enough number of people saying yes to the cause that you are fighting for, then that will be on the ballot for the 2026 election.
Yes. And then if more people vote yes on it than no, then it becomes
Hmm.
law.
Yes. Okay. Cool. Got it. And of course, it's a process which is applicable, like you said, to some of these states in US.
Yeah, about half of states do citizen-led ballot measures, and then there are some where you can get a representative to put something on the
Hmm.
ballot,
Hmm.
and then people can vote on it. So it's a similar process.
Hmm.
And there are some states where they don't do it at all. So
Hmm.
we're trying to work in the states where we do have the ability to affect change in that way.
Hmm. Interesting, and this sounds also very unique type of activism, because of course I've been following the pro animal pages as well, and yeah, this really sounds unique. And how many states are you operating out of as of now?
Right now, we're in two, but for the next election cycle, we're going to be in three. And
Okay.
then the goal is going to be 10 by the next decade.
Hmm.
So we want to eventually be in all the states that we can.
Hmm. Interesting. And since you talked about the elections, and you made a video recently on Charlie Kirk, so I would like to ask you, I would like to ask you, what's your views on conservatives becoming vegan?
Conservatives becoming vegan.
Yeah.
If we look at the data on Mm. if conservatives versus liberals are vegan, it's somewhere that liberals are 2 to 3 times more likely to be vegan than conservatives. So they're definitely less common than the liberal vegans, but that doesn't mean we should ignore them.
Mm.
Throughout the pro animal future campaigns,
Ju-
we learned that the yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just a small interjection there. You said more likely to be vegan. So you're not talking about the number of vegans that are there today. You're saying more likely to be vegan, and what data are you referring to that says that liberals are more likely to go vegan than conservatives by a factor of two or three?
No, 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 I meant when you look at current vegans, they're 2 to 3 times more
Okay.
likely to be liberal.
Oh, okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
we don't know if someone's a conservative or a vegan, how likely they are to go vegan. I don't think that kind of data exists yet, unfortunately. I wish we could know kind of who's going to go vegan. Because I'm sure, I never thought I would. I don't know if you ever thought you would, but it seems almost like it just kind of happens to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, throughout the Pro Animal Future campaigns, we learn, like at first we thought that the Democrats would be our allies, that maybe they might support us, and we learned over the course of the campaign that that wasn't the case. They came out against us pretty hard. They came out against measures in other cities for no reason at all because they care about protecting corporations, the status quo, and money. So that's when I really started thinking it doesn't seem to make sense to focus on liberals or Democrats in general because they're coming out so hard against us. It seems as if a lot of them are more interested in virtue signaling than actually changing their behavior.
Mm,
Conservatives, while there are less vegan conservatives now, they are also more interested in personal responsibility. A lot of
mm,
them are Christian. There are plenty of over the last year or so, I've learned a lot more about veganism and Christianity thanks to
mm,
Christspiracy and another book. So I think that we're not targeting them as effectively as we could be and as we should be. So I do think that we should focus more on conservatives. Additionally, I don't know if you followed much about the US election, but there was this squirrel that was killed basically by the government, Peanut the Squirrel. And Trump made a post about it. Elon talked about it. They said it was evil. The government should
mm,
have done that, that Peanut was murdered. The Democrats didn't say anything about it at all.
mm,
So we have conservatives saying that animals are being murdered and Democrats ignoring the situation.
mm, mm. Interesting. So, yeah, essentially, we should be targeting everyone is the message. Of course, how we talk to them, that can strategically change, but yeah. um, and of course, you mentioned something very interesting with the liberals, that sometimes it's more of a lip service, right? Where it's like uh, a facade that's there, but at its core they don't want to change. There's no personal accountability, right? So that's there. I think that's the problem globally in any country you look at, wherever there's a divide between the right and the left. So there are nuances on both sides, and there are political motivations on both sides. So like at the end of the day, like I personally feel that politicians are, they can be liberals one day, and like they can switch sides as well wherever they see there
Yeah.
is the value. Yeah. But what I hear from you is that your views have changed in the sense that now you are more hopeful that conservatives will also can also become vegans.
More hopeful. I'm not necessarily super hopeful about honestly anyone going vegan. It seems like people just hate vegans. I don't know if the number of vegans has gone up significantly in the US. That could
Hmm,
be different in other parts of the world. We can see in the UK, demand for meat has gone down quite a bit. In Germany, it's gone down a
hmm,
lot, partially due to vegans and vegetarians. We don't see those same numbers in the US right now. I think there's much more of a culture war surrounding it, as well as just this sense of American freedom and individuality, and no one should be telling me what to do,
hmm, hmm,
and things like that. So it's a mix of a lot of different things.
hmm,
But we definitely need to do something because it's just getting worse and worse for the animals globally. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm trying to focus where I am, which unfortunately is the United States.
Hmm. Interesting. And you know vegans already who are conservatives, right? And some of them are content creators as well. I guess you have debated some of them on different forums here and there, and also on comment section. But the larger point is that because of differences in political ideology between vegans, there are also clashes between vegans. So on that note, what do you think are the opportunities and the challenges of vegans from different factions? Like, let's say, what are the opportunities and challenges if there are more number of vegan influencers? Even though I hate the term influencers, but you know what I mean, right? That vegan influencers who are conservatives versus more number of vegan influencers who are liberals.
Yeah, I mean, I think that generally we should try not to fight each other about differences in political opinions, and we should try to unite over what matters. But we're human beings, and human beings are not known to do that. We have a strong sense of identity and tribalism, especially
Hmm,
when you look at Palestine versus Israel. There's a lot of strife among the vegan community about your opinions
hmm,
on that.
hmm,
And there's other things like in various activism communities. If one person is posting on their personal Facebook things that other people disagree with,
hmm,
then they'll want them kicked out of the group. And I think we should reorient to focus on who's willing to do the good work, who's working hard, and try to just keep our heads down and focus on fighting for the animals.
hmm,
And it sucks that there are people that disagree with you and have views that you consider terrible,
hmm,
but fighting over those isn't going to help the animals stuck on factory farms. We need to be
hmm,
uniting as many people as possible. The vegan population, at least in the US, is only 1 to 3%.
hmm.
3%, we're not going to see the kind of changes we want to see for animals. And if we divide that even further based on who cares about certain political issues and what they think, then we have absolutely no chance at all.
Hmm. I mean, of course, what you're saying is probably the politically most correct answer. But that being said, you are an influencer, and once again, I hate the term, but I mean, you are in a position to influence not only pre-vegans but also vegans, right? But being a public persona, you also face criticism from different groups and sometimes within the vegan community. So, just on that note, when people criticize you, especially vegans, how do you handle that, and how do you prevent and your burnout from that?
Yeah, I remember the first time I really got criticized by vegans, and it felt really bad. I was upset by it. I let it affect other parts of my life, and I had a harder time focusing. And then I just kind of thought about it and realized that, just because they're vegan, that doesn't mean that they're right about this.
Hmm,
And then I looked to other vegan influencers that I really admire,
hmm,
and people are always criticizing them. And I
hmm,
thought, okay, here's this person that's doing great work. They're still getting all this criticism.
hmm,
So for me to get criticism is actually kind of an honor because that means that people are paying attention to what I'm saying.
hmm,
And as soon as you start posting content on the internet, you're going to get a lot of criticism from meat eaters.
hmm,
Getting it from vegans feels worse, but if you
hmm,
can kind of bucket it into the same category as the meat eaters, just that, these people are wrong about this, maybe they're right about some things, or maybe they're right.
hmm,
Is their criticism valid? I think that's another thing to look at and to think about. But if you determine that it's not valid, then I think it's more effective to just try to ignore it as best as you can
hmm,
and to try to keep focusing on what matters, which is the work that you're doing
hmm,
for the animals. The other way I think about it is that putting content out on the internet you get some benefits from that, right? Like you and me, we both got
hmm,
jobs that we love
hmm,
from doing that. People are more interested in talking to me at conferences, so I make more connections. There are a lot of benefits to it,
hmm,
but the hate you get is just one of the costs.
hmm,
You can't get those benefits without the cost. So I
hmm.
try to think about it like that.
Yeah, that's really a nice way to look at it, right? And other day I was reading somewhere, I think one of the books on stoicism, that uh, in any situation, any event, that you get in life, you get it as a package. So there will be things associated with it which will, like you said, will give you benefits, but then there will also be some repercussions which may be tertiary in nature, not if, like not evident to you at the moment, but yeah, you get it as a whole package. And you think shifting to this mindset has helped you cope with such situations?
Yeah, definitely. I've gotten attacked by vegans fairly regularly.
Hmm. And
And the first time it really bothered me. Now it doesn't really phase me at all.
any particular incident that you would like to talk about if you are comfortable?
Sorry, yeah, I don't want to draw attention
Hmm.
to fighting within the community. But I am curious what stoicism book you were talking about because I
So
tend to read a lot of that.
you do? I'll send you the list of my. So I'm a big time book nerd. I'll send you the list of Stoic books which I read. Currently, I'm reading one by an author named William Fand. I may be mispronouncing the name. So he breaks down uh, the depth of stoicism, but without losing essence. Like a lot of writers these days, they talk about stoicism, but I think they, to make it very simple, they lose out on the nuances. So I think he's one author where I feel the balance between simplicity and nuances there. So I'll share that with you. Plus I've also created a list, but just because we are talking about books, and I was curious to actually ask you that you mentioned that you have learned about veganism and Christianity from a book. So I wanted to know about that book. And I also maintain a list of animal rights book on Goodreads. So when I went to Goodreads like 3 4 years back to and searched veganism, like the top 50 entries, they were all related to plant based cooking and stuff. And
Oh no.
then I created a whole list, and now I share with everyone. And of course, I'll share the book on stoicism as well. And I know that you are a big time book reader as well, because I have subscribed to your subs Substack, is it called, right? Where I,
Oh
yeah.
nice.
So
Yeah.
because you always mention the books that you read, and interesting thing, uh, there was this time I was reading that book, and you also made a post that currently you are reading that book, and that was by that was by an author. Again, I'm very bad with names. Charlie Duhigg or someone on Super Communicator. I think the name of the book was.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Charles Duhigg.
Charles Duhigg. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I'm very bad with names, so I forget those. But yeah, yeah, and yeah. So, which is the book that you were referring to for veganism and Christianity?
Sure. So it's called Vegans versus the Verses, and it's not something I would have picked up, but the author saw my review of Christspiracy, and then he sent it to me, and then it sat on my bookshelf for about 7 months. And then
Hmm.
one day I decided to pick it up, and I found that it was really good. It was really interesting. It was informative.
Okay.
It is a little dense in some ways when you're like, I would love to have another version of it where if someone brings this up, it just tells you what to say. Like if someone says that we have dominion over animals, say this, as opposed to kind of going through all the different verses and the biblical history,
Hmm.
because I don't have any familiarity with the Bible. And there's some things that I feel like are harder for me to understand. But
Hmm.
I think it's a really great starting point, and it just kind of gives you this question that you can use if everything else fails, which
Hmm.
is if a Christian has a choice of food that comes from violence and animal abuse or food that comes from compassion and
Hmm.
kindness,
Hmm.
shouldn't the Christian always choose compassion? And
Hmm.
that's a question you can use when you don't necessarily have all the knowledge of the different verses.
Yeah.
Like the person that
Yeah.
you're talking to
Yeah.
might know the Bible pretty well.
I just love the way your mind works. But before I get into that, I'll just add to the last thing that you mentioned, and I have created a version of it after talking to people of different faith in India, because we have people from so many faiths. Especially, I'm a Hindu, and uh, I come from a Hindu family, and then uh, I talk to people from Muslim background, right? And this is a very similar question which I ask them, that hey, I get it that you have animal slaughter and everything in your religion, but I'm asking you a very simple question, that if I today want to become a Muslim, but at the same time I would still want to be a vegan, can I do that? And more often than not they'll say yes, you can do that. And then I say, then that means you can be a good Muslim while being a vegan. Then, so I mean, on similar lines,
Nice.
like what you are saying, right? And since we are discussing books, uh, I wanted to ask you this because this is something I discussed with Seb Alex as well. He also seemed like a book nerd. We discussed Tom Regan and stuff, and and he actually gave this as an advice, which I feel is very much applicable, and I see that in your work as well. And hence, I wanted to ask you if you have already thought about it. That do you think that getting into the academic side of animal rights makes you a better activist?
The academic side, do you mean just kind of reading books about animal rights,
Yeah.
or yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that reading is one of the best things that you can do for yourself because you're basically getting 1 to 2 years of knowledge from someone who has thought deeply about a topic, and
Mm,
you're basically downloading that into your brain over the course of 10 hours, right?
mm,
And when you have these books about animal rights that are really thoughtful and profound, even if you don't remember exactly what's said in them, those ideas still influence you. And especially if you can, highlight your favorite quotes, try to learn them, try to write them in your own words, and then use them
mm,
in your advocacy. And you will sound so much more eloquent and thoughtful. And you'll make a bigger difference for animals. And then, if you ever get the opportunity to give speeches or move to a
mm,
bigger stage, then you'll have that background of knowledge that you can lean into to help inform your ideas. So, I think for sure people should be reading animal rights as well as writing about it and
mm,
speaking about it too.
mm,
And I think that's why making videos is so great because you have to write a script and you have to film yourself and you
mm,
get feedback on how other people feel about it based on likes and comments. So doing stuff like that is so valuable. If we had an army of vegans who could all speak beautifully about why animals should have rights,
mm.
we'd be in a much better position than we currently are.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because this is something which I also emphasize a lot on. So I do activism training with some activists in India, and this is one thing which I tell people that uh, I don't know if you relate with this, but I'll share this thought with you that one of the reasons why a lot of people burn out. I mean, there are multiple reasons why people burn out from activism is because of bad activism. I mean, this sometimes people get mildly offended by this, but my point is that when you do good advocacy, right, even if the person doesn't go vegan, but you know that you have planted the seed of veganism, right? And which, as someone who has done so much of street outreach, you would know, right, that okay, this was a good conversation. I know that if this person stays on a vegan ecosystem, there's a very good chance that that person might become vegan or at least pro animal in some way, right? So, and that indication is a win for you. But if you get into altercations, not because you lack patience, but because you were not able to convey your point and counter the points, and you end up thinking, oh, the other person is a bad person, and you get frustrated, right? So of course that can happen. There can be people who are absolutely horrible, right? I'm not denying that, but at the same time, our ability to hold up a meaningful discussion matters a lot. Do you relate with that?
Yeah, I actually thought of someone specific. I won't mention any names, but there was this activist who I did cubes with sometimes, and he was very aggressive.
Mm,
And people would come up to him and be interested in having a good discussion. It would end with him yelling at them that they're an animal abuser and then
yeah.
walking off angrily. And to him, that was a good interaction because he had to be basically shamed into going vegan. But for most people, that's not really going to work. And he didn't even believe in burnout and he would make fun of people who had burned out. And now he's burned out. He's not doing activism.
Hmm.
And I think that that kind of proves that point is that, if he hadn't had so many negative interactions with people,
Hmm.
maybe he would still be doing activism for animals right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm. Interesting. And on also on the aggressive point, like a lot of people ask this. So I tell them that being aggressive is also fine as long as that is planned aggression. And if that is a planned aggression, then it's not an aggression anymore, right? Like, for example, let's say if you talk to someone and you are ridiculing the other person, but you know that this is being recorded and being published to the wider audience, like for example talking to a Piers Morgan or someone like that. So I mean, you can be, I'm not saying people to be aggressive, be assertive, don't dilute your points, but yeah, if you're thought about aggression in before that, today I have to be like that, and if it's well planned and well thought, but if it's happening just out of instinct in that moment, that's what leads to a burnout. And absolutely what you are saying, I've seen people who started and then they were like, hey, this doesn't work, so I don't think this, I'll continue this, and then they stopped or burnt out and had issues. So yeah, that is actually something I can totally relate with. And
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to an idea in Stoicism, which is that you want to control your anger. You don't want to let it control you. So if you are
hmm,
acting out of anger in an intentional way, like,
hmm,
this is going to be good content for YouTube, that's very different from not being able to control your words because you're so angry at the other
hmm.
person.
Hmm. Exactly, exactly. And in my training session, I was telling this to people. I was trying to break down a Joey Carbstrong anger video, and I was mentioning that that's my best guess, that this doesn't look like that he's angry at the moment. He is actually doing it for the camera, because he knows that this conversation is not for the person he's talking to, but for the camera and for the reach, so that it can reach out to other people. So I mean, that's very strategic and smart in that way. And yeah, let you should use your anger rather than the anger using you. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Like when Joey, there was one where he went outside of a church and he had a sign that said,
exactly, that one I used. Oh my god,
Meat eating is the devil." Oh, that's the one you.
that's the one I used in my session. I played
That's hilarious.
I played two videos. One where where he went outside the church, and then there was the other one where the other person is saying ridiculous stuff, but he's still maintaining his composure. And those two look so different. And I said that this is strategic thinking. So even if you see, because in India, since we did not have many activist content creators as such, so even here, like you rightly said, we have looked up to Joey Carbstrong and Earthling Ed, right? And people, I see Joey Carbstrong is so aggressive. I say, I don't think he's aggressive. He's smart to control his aggression and do it for the camera. But yeah, exactly. Please continue. That is the video even I showed in my session.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it says what eating meat is the devil or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And this Christian woman is just so mad. And they just go back and forth for 40 minutes. And when things kind of die down, Joey comes in super aggressive because he's trying to provoke her
Hmm,
the whole time.
hmm,
And I think it's, like you said, just mostly to get views and to get attention on the issue,
hmm,
not trying to change that woman's mind,
hmm,
because a lot of people like that, you're just not going to change them anyway, but you can change the audience.
hmm. Yeah. And talking about content, I would like to ask you that has your content I mean, of course, what we see as viewers is one thing, but if I want to get inside the head of a content creator, what are like the top three things that has changed in your content strategy? That's one. And a more detailed question to that is that, what, as a content creator and who has been in the vegan movement for so long, what type of content you think should be produced more, and what type of content which currently is being produced should be produced less?
Oh, wow. Yeah, so I guess as far as my content strategy, when I first started, the goal was just to build consistency and build knowledge. And I felt that the best way to do that was to do one YouTube video a week for years, basically. And I've seen that a lot of channels that do that, eventually they're gonna get more success. And I wanted to be able to earn a living full time from YouTube, and from content creation in general. So that was my goal for a few years. And then everything sort of changed once I got a job with an animal rights organization, because I didn't have to worry about making money anymore. And I didn't have to do that consistency as much. So it became more about making videos when I felt like I had an interesting topic to discuss. And I think something that a lot more vegans should be doing is YouTube and longer form stuff, because there's so much short form content that it almost feels like, not necessarily that we have enough, but we do have a lot of great short form content, and there's not as much valuable long form content anymore. I think that was different a few years ago. A lot of the bigger vegan YouTubers have stopped making content completely or started making less and less.
Hmm.
So I think getting in there would be really good.
Hmm.
It seems as if we have enough street outreach, especially on YouTube. I'd like to see more thoughtful essays, discussions
Hmm.
about deeper animal rights topics, even stuff about the climate and things like that. I think it's almost important for us to widen our niche because a lot of times with vegan videos, they're mostly reaching
Hmm.
vegans. So we want to broaden our horizons a bit and try to reach people who aren't vegan
Hmm.
and see if we can bring them in another way. So my content strategy upcoming is going to be continue to focus more on short form content to grow Pro Animal Futures brand,
Hmm.
as well as widen my YouTube niche. And just, I feel like there's still a lot of trust in the meat industry in the US compared to oil and gas or the healthcare
Hmm.
industry. And I would like to create the type of content that makes it clear that the meat industry is just as bad, if not worse,
Hmm.
than those other industries, and just make sure that people don't believe in the humane washing
Hmm.
and that they really know that the meat industry CEOs are in this for power and money. They don't care about animals. So building that distrust that people have for other industries into my content is one of my goals for the next 1 to 2 years.
Interesting. And that is still within the umbrella of animal rights. You also said that you would want more diversified content. So have you thought about some other topics that you can make videos on?
Well, animal rights, I always want it to be the core of what I
Hmm?
do. Some other interests I have that I can relate to animal rights. One thing would be in the United States, everything is very car focused, which means that there's basically no public transit. It means it's unsafe to ride bicycles. It means you have to sit in traffic when you don't want to, that it's hard to go places without driving, and that people who can't afford a car really don't have many good options. So, one area of advocacy I'm interested in is helping solve that problem, make people less dependent on cars, improve cycling infrastructure and public transit. So I think making content about that, I also feel like it relates to animal rights just
Hmm.
because of how many animals are killed on the roads in the US every single day. It's about 1 million animals every single day.
Wow.
And we don't have to be driving so much. If we have the option to take a bus or to bike, I think vegans should be taking that option more. So I would be talking about encouraging people to do
Hmm.
that sort of stuff. So that's another area, as well as climate change and bird flu is really popping off here in the US. It's a
Hmm.
disaster. So things about public health and that sort of nature. But I want it all to come from an animal rights foundation.
Hmm. Very interesting and very unique topic. You want to talk about the public transport situation in the US, and you mentioned something interesting that you want vegans to take uh, public transport than private cars, and you want to encourage them. But a hard question: do you think it's an obligation?
People always ask about moral obligations, and I have a hard time with that because I don't think we're obligated to do anything. I'm not
Hmm.
super religious. I don't think there's a God that's telling us what to do. There's not really some sense of,
Hmm.
uh, you know, objective morality. So I don't think it's an obligation, but I do think that if you want to make the world a better place,
Hmm.
then driving less is a great avenue to do that. Not only because you could accidentally hit an animal. Every time you drive, it releases carbon into the atmosphere, which stays there for thousands of years.
Hmm.
Even if you have an electric car, I really just don't have any faith in electric cars because I think we need to be moving away from cars completely.
Hmm.
Also, when you support public transit, you're helping support a system that does make the city better
Hmm.
and that helps people who don't have enough money to afford a car.
Hmm.
It's also just way better for the environment.
Hmm. Interesting. And since you mentioned that you don't believe in objective morality, then how do you deal with people who say, I'm sure you would have come across someone, or at least you would have seen some videos where people say, hey, I participate in animal exploitation because that's my reality, and morality is subjective.
Morality is subjective. That's definitely one of the ones I leaned on before I was vegan as
Hmm.
well. I think that what I like to say is, it's way too hard to disprove subjective morality. So
Hmm.
I just like to focus on the victims.
Hmm.
And this tends to work pretty well in conversation is I'll say, okay, maybe morality could be subjective, but I think that it really starts to matter when there's a victim involved. For example, if I kicked a dog, the reason that would be immoral is because it hurts the dog. Whereas when you eat animal products, the reason that that's immoral is because there's a victim, the animals. And then people can understand that even if morality is subjective, that doesn't mean that our decisions don't have consequences in the real world. So I think it's important to tie them back to reality as opposed to just thinking of things in terms of philosophy, like what are the actual effects
Hmm.
that my actions are causing.
Hmm. Hmm. I can see that you are deeply influenced by Stoicism, because, like, I read Stoicism first, and then I started reading other philosophies, like, which, like you said, becomes too heavy on theories and philosophies. And Stoicism is very much rooted in practical application of philosophy, right? So, and that perhaps shows in your activism as well. Earlier you mentioned, and this was on my list of questions as well, you talked about the meat eating industry, uh, sorry, the meat industry. And I remember you wrote an article about this, and you have been talking about it in some other places as well, that the meat eaters are not the enemy, it's the industry that's the problem. So, essentially, to summarize your article, you said that the meat eaters aren't the enemy because people are brainwashed, which I totally support your view there, that that humans are conditioned in a certain way to act in a certain way. And then you gave a very good comparison point, that think of a meat eater as yourself one day before you uh, became vegan, right? So, till this point I completely agree with you, but then you said that the industry is the enemy, right? And that is where I want to get into that. Don't you think this is like a kind of a false binary where we are seeing meat eaters versus the industry? And the reason why I say this is because industry is just a reflection of what we as a society want. In the sense, like, yes, of course there are decision makers there who are wreaking havoc on the animals, and they are using marketing tactics to keep people in thinking in a certain way. But even when the industrialization didn't exist there, and the process work didn't exist, there was still local farms who were still exploiting animals and still seeing animals as resources, right? So what I feel is that while we should not hate an individual, but at the same time leaving the accountability just to the industry uh, is not the right way to think about it. So if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure exactly how it works in other countries,
Hmm.
but in the United States, the meat industry gets billions and billions of dollars from the government in the form of subsidies
Hmm.
to influence advertising. They also get to lower the price of their products. And we know that price has an outsized impact on consumer demand more than
Hmm.
anything
Hmm.
else. So the fact that meat or that animal products are so much cheaper than they should be, that's the real reason I think that people are buying them. It's not because it's something that they really want, although that may be partially true. It's more because of all of the marketing and the unfair market in which the meat industry gets to operate. And the fact that we've been culturally programmed to view this as completely normal. We were all most people were raised eating meat, especially in the US. And if you don't eat meat, you're considered a weirdo. So there's a lot of social and cultural and financial pressure to continue to buy into this system. So I wouldn't say that meat eaters have zero responsibility,
Hmm.
but I don't think that we can realistically fight the meat eaters. There are too many of them. Whereas the industry, I think, is a more appropriate target because it's clear, right? Like we know who's running these companies, we know what they're doing, we know where they're located, and we can focus on that and even get the meat eaters to see that the industry is a problem and then use them to help us bring the industry down.
Yeah, and of course that is reflected in the work that you're doing with Pro Animal Future as well. My only point is that even, let's say, tend to we end up hurting these industries, and let's say we do away with the subsidies, right, and that will drive up the prices. And because price is such a strong determinant of the demand will come down, but still people will continue to see animals as resources, right? They will still participate in, like, the total number of animals being exploited may come down, but the system of animal exploitation will still exist, even though it may become less sophisticated than it is today. So that's what I wanted to understand from you, that like, at the end of the day, until and unless we get people to actually stop seeing animals as slaves and products, don't you think that a vegan world will be like almost impossible?
Yeah, I think that because so many people support the meat industry and it is such a big part of most people's lives, it almost blinds them to even being able to think about animals as not being slaves.
Hmm.
And I think that sometimes behavior needs to change before your thoughts
Hmm.
and feelings change. For example,
Hmm.
if you start a new habit, right? Say you want to start going to the gym, you need to actually go to the gym a few times before you even think of yourself as someone who values
Hmm.
exercise. And in the same way, when I first started going vegan, it was mostly done out of health for about 6 months before I watched Dominion and actually went vegan. I just thought it was healthier. I tried to do vegan for breakfast and lunch for a while. And I think that opened me up to
Hmm.
being able to deal with the idea of animal rights because that's a difficult idea to deal with if your daily actions are so dependent on animal exploitation.
Hmm.
So I think that in the US, if we can get rid of factory farms, right, that's 99% of the meat supply,
Hmm.
then that means that so few people are going to be able to afford meat and most people are going to stop eating it anyway and then their feelings will catch up to that and they'll stop viewing animals as resources similar to fur. A lot of Americans are against fur just because they don't wear it very much. They can't afford it. They don't know anyone who wears it,
Hmm.
so they think it's wrong to kill animals for fur, but they think it's okay to kill animals for food because they're doing that every day, even though it's
Hmm.
basically the same thing. They're both unnecessary products.
Hmm.
So I almost think that we have to start with action and then the thinking comes in line with that action.
Hmm. Interesting. And this is something I was discussing with someone else the other day as well, who's also a huge believer in the fact that a plant based economy is going to drive the vegan movement. Like, either you produce more plant based accessible stuff, or you bring down the production of animal products. And then this thought process that you can think your way into an action, or you can act your way into a thought. And a great example of that would be everyone who went plant based first and then they turned vegan.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know which is more common because it
Hmm.
seems like a lot of plant-based people never even connect with the idea of animal
Yeah.
rights and then they go back to eating animals. We see that all the time. So it's hard to say what's really going to connect someone with animal rights, but I do think that actions are a great starting point for anything.
Hmm. And I see it the other way around, that while actions can be a great starting point, but I'm sure that you will agree with this as well, that the eventually, whether at the beginning or at the end, the thought has to be there for someone to become an ethical vegan.
Yeah, so you're saying basically like if someone goes plant-based and they don't really think about animal rights,
Hmm.
they're never really gonna be vegan?
Yeah, or even
Yeah.
even if they become vegan for superficial reasons. I mean, I feel that's the recipe for ex-vegan, is what I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's backed up by science as well, or
Hmm.
like the one study we really have on ex-vegans does show that the people who are in it for ethical reasons are a lot more likely to actually stick with it.
Hmm. Exactly. Interesting thing you talked about the fur ban, and that was there on my list of questions as well. I want to talk about single issue campaigns and non-vegan supporting single issue campaigns. So I know that to an extent that of course you support it, but like, what's your view on it, more at a theoretical level and also at a practical level?
Sure. So I guess the question would be like, let's say you're having a fur protest and there's a group of animal rights advocates, and then a non-vegan comes in and they want to join your fur protest as well. Should you turn them away, or should you be open to them coming out to help, even if they're not vegan? To me, the answer seems clear when we look at it from the animal's perspective, which we should always be doing.
Hmm.
If you were an animal trapped on a fur farm and you knew that a group of people was trying to get you out of there, would you care at all whether that person was morally consistent in all their actions? Probably not. You would just want people out there fighting for you and doing the work to get you out of there. So I think that since vegans are such a small percentage of the population, 1 to 3%, we need more help from meat eaters and vegetarians to really see the kind of change we want to see in society. When culture changes rapidly, it usually takes about 25% of people, caring about an issue before we see that rapid shift.
Hmm.
I don't see us getting to 25% of people being vegan very quickly, but I could see us getting, the 3% vegans, the 5% vegetarians, and then getting a small percentage of meat eaters to really care about animal rights. And then we could see this massive societal shift. So I think we should absolutely be trying to recruit non-vegans, even if we disagree with them. Maybe it'll make going out to eat afterward a little awkward because you'll have to tell them, hey, like we only want to
Hmm.
eat at vegan places or whatever. But then there's an opportunity for you to really set boundaries.
Hmm.
Also, there's a greater chance that that person will end up going vegan if they know a lot of vegans and it's normal for them to be around vegans. They're
Hmm.
so much more likely to actually do it than if they were kicked out of a vegan group for not being vegan. That doesn't seem like it would help any animals, in my
Hmm.
opinion.
Hmm. A thought there, Natalie, that if you think about it, for the past 3 decades or probably more than that, isn't that the approach that has been taken by all these big organizations? I'll not name them, but you know the ones I'm talking about. This is the same approach that has been taken by these organizations, coming up with single issue campaign petitions, so on and so forth. But if I stringently look at the data of the consumption of animal products in one way or the other, has only increased. And of course, that has also to do with the fact that the consumption in general has increased because of the population increase. But still, uh, this is the approach that we have taken for so long. And do you think that has worked?
Sure. So I guess it's important to separate kind of what anti-fur activists are doing versus what how much animal products people are eating.
Hmm.
In terms of fur activism, it's gone pretty well over the last few decades. There was a period where the fur industry was almost crushed and then it really came back a lot. And then since 2019, there have been a lot more protests and tons of brands have dropped fur and things are going pretty well now, although there's still a lot of work to do. The reason that there's been an increase in meat consumption, you'd have to break it down country by country. That's not true everywhere. In the UK, it's gone down. Germany, it's gone down. In the US, it's tended to go up. And in developing countries, as people get more industrialized, then they start building factory farms, and then the cost of meat goes down and people
mm,
start eating more, as well as when people make more money, they
mm,
tend to consume a lot more animal products.
mm,
So as the world has gotten wealthier,
mm,
that consumption has gone up.
mm,
So I almost feel like it's unrelated to veganism and has more to do with factors that are outside of our control. In a similar way, we can see that meat consumption dropped a lot in 2020. That probably wasn't because of vegan activism. It was because of the pandemic and
pandemic.
because people weren't meeting up as much to go to barbecues. They weren't going out to restaurants.
Mm,
So there are a lot of things that are outside of our control.
mm. And since we are on the subject, so what's your opinion on the pure welfarist approach, where we are just saying that, hey, make the lives of animals better, bigger cages, and so on and so forth?
Sure. So I think that welfarism has its time and it has its place, right? If we can get rid of cage-free egg production, not only does that make life better for the chickens, they're not going to have great, meaningful lives, but at least they'll be able to spread their wings and they won't be trapped in a cage
Mm,
where the wire hurts their feet all the time, 24/7. So they will have better life. So it does reduce suffering. But I think the real benefit to doing welfare stuff is that it makes animal products more expensive. And, like I've really been saying, price is a huge factor determining what people buy. So
mm,
people are less likely to buy these products because they're more expensive. So I do think there's value with that there. I
mm,
hear the concern and I agree with the concern that if we say, oh, let's just get rid of cages, then you're almost saying that doing this to animals is okay. But the reason that doesn't factor as much into my equation is because people already think that doing this to animals is okay. So you're not really changing their opinion, like they already think that.
mm,
People already think the meat industry is super happy and that the animals are on fields and whatnot. They have
mm,
no idea how bad it is.
mm,
So anytime you bring up how bad it is, you're still educating the public. That being said, I don't get super excited about welfare activism.
mm,
Pretty much all my time is spent on stuff that has the more abolitionist approach, but I think there's value to both.
mm, mm. And also, like a slight difference with single issue campaigns, especially with banning something. I feel that if you are banning something, then that is not part of welfarism. So, with the, for example, because you are doing away with a certain system, and that's going to hurt the industry, and that will reflect as well. But you talked about like this point that, like, personally, I am a very hardcore abolitionist. Like, I feel, um, maybe there's a discussion for some other time, but if I start ranting about welfarism, I'll go on forever. But yeah, uh, and I know that you have met people with that views as well, right? So just to understand this point better, your philosophical view. So I'm assuming that you don't relate with deontology as much. Is that a correct assumption?
What was it?
Deontology, like rights violation.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's value in it, but, yeah, I tend to be much more action oriented,
Hmm.
which is why I tend toward virtue ethics like stoicism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we talk about utilitarianism, we talk about deontology, but sometimes virtue ethics is something that we neglect. And yeah, uh, of course, shows in your work as well when you talk about stoicism. So yeah, and you mentioned books. Any books in specific that you would want the viewers to read to learn about animal rights, the academic side of animal rights or the activism side of animal rights?
Oof, yeah, there's a lot of great books. I feel like it's tough for me to remember a lot of the best activism books because I read them so long ago.
Hmm?
But one that I think is really great is Eat Like You Care by Gary
Francione.
Francione. Yeah, that was one of the first books I read after going vegan, and I
Hmm.
think it's just a really solid kind of discussion about animal rights. I also think, in terms of if you want to just get out there and get to the streets. I think Earthling Ed's 30 non-vegan books, or 30 non-vegan excuses and how to respond to them, is excellent. Just tells you exactly what to say. And in terms of learning more about the meat industry, there's this book called The Meat Racket, and it's about how the industry really consolidated in the US. It's about the Tyson's family, like
Mm,
Tyson's Chicken,
mhm,
and how they rose to power and basically changed the meat industry forever. So I think that's really interesting. Um, Melanie Joy's books are solid.
mm.
And yeah, I'm sure I'm missing a ton,
Yeah,
but those are some of the ones that come to mind right now.
yeah. And since you mentioned Gary Francione, I think um, I am inspired by his books a lot, especially the abolitionist approach. Uh, yeah, so someday I would want to have a discussion with him as well. But then I also hear from a lot of vegans that as an individual, they like he is always surrounded by controversies and stuff. But otherwise, his books are great. At least as I can say with 100% certainty.
Yeah, I think that we gotta separate the art from the artist. Otherwise, as vegans, we wouldn't have any art to consume because most artists are meat eaters anyway, right? So let's just focus on what they write as opposed to all the other kind of crazy stuff they say. If that's happening, I don't know too much about Gary Francione,
Okay,
honestly.
okay, okay. No, we will not. We have steered clear of controversy. Plus, in like I want to discuss more controversial topics, but I have like my guidelines not to get into controversy. So maybe some other day we'll do a live on that. Yeah, we'll discuss about the topics that the uh, which you didn't like the criticism from the vegans. So probably someday we'll discuss it.
Oof.
Reopen the Pandora's box. But yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the Earthling Ed's that 30 excuses, that free PDF version, which I feel is one of the most underrated works of Earthling Ed. I guess that because he has published the other books and you can buy them and that one is free, so maybe he's not publicizing it as much, but that is really a good book, straight to the point, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's the book that turned me vegan. So I'll
Oh,
always have some affinity for it, especially.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Nice, nice. Any last message that you have for the vegans? I mean, th-
For the vegans,
yeah.
man. Um, yeah, I would say that if you are vegan, but you're not active, try to get into activism. It can seem really scary at first, but there are all different types of activism you can do. Some of them are super easy, some of them require more work. If you need help getting into activism, DM me on Instagram at Natty Fulton, and I'll try to give you some solid advice. I'm always happy to help there. I think that as vegans, when we're not consuming animal products, it's easy to think that you're doing your part, right?
Mm,
Because you're not buying into this system of animal exploitation, you're not
mm,
paying for animals to be tortured intentionally. But the way I think about it is that we live in this carnist system, and removing yourself from that system isn't enough to actually overthrow that system.
mm,
But if we all come together and take action, then we do have a shot at overthrowing that system. So let's try to think, okay, what actions can we take to really fight against these evil industries that torture and abuse animals?
mm,
And more importantly, what can I do on a daily basis to help with that fight? Because I don't think just not contributing to it is enough because of that government support and those subsidies and just this hard or this big system against us. We have to do more. And anything that you can do to help is valuable and
mm.
play to your strengths.
Exactly. So get active for the animals, and like you said, play
Yes.
to your strengths. That means identify your talents and innate qualities and see how that can be translated into activism. And um, you said that uh, because removing yourself from the system is not enough because the governments are the industries are so powerful, and of course the number of people who are not vegan is so large that just removing yourself from the system is not enough. And on that note, I think something interesting and something kind of off topic, that I that I find that a lot of vegans are anti-natalist. And then I then I think that, okay, even if you do some significant work, but if majority of vegans are anti-natalist, and then we don't, because I believe that if you are pro-natalist, and or if you pass on the vegan values to your children, then at least you are passing the value of veganism further. But the rate at which vegans are anti-natalist, then I feel that in a couple of generations the number of vegans will also reduce. Not to say that I'm a pro natalist, I'm personally child free, but there's something which I think at 3 a.m. at night, okay, is this something right? Should vegans create more babies and, and
Well, it's a huge risk, right? Because like so many vegans have babies and then they don't stay vegan, right? So
yeah.
it's a big gamble.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this part is just for fun. This is a half cooked idea. Please don't make or not make babies based on this conversation.
Based on what we say. Yeah, it's a bigger decision than that, I think.
Yeah, it's a bigger decision. Someone actually, because I said in one of my videos, so that I'm child free, but I don't buy into the idea of antinatalism for other reasons. And then someone invited me over for a debate and stuff. I said, okay, fine, I will read the book on antinatalism by David Bennett, I think the name is, and then I'll get back to you and have a debate around it. Yeah,
Have you read it yet?
I've read around 30% so far, making notes and
Okay.
stuff. Yeah, have you read it?
No, no, I haven't. I haven't debated anyone on antinatalism. I feel like I'm not planning on having kids. So I feel as if that's enough thought to be put into it for me, like I don't necessarily want to tell anyone else what to do
Yeah,
in that regard.
yeah,
But yeah, I'd be curious to read the case for it.
yeah, yeah. So you are also child free in that case, like how I am. So
Yeah.
we have made that as an individual choice, but we are not taking it as an ethical stance and what everyone to be it. And that's what the other person, because there are vegans who are anti-natalist, and then there are so many vegans who are child free. So yeah, uh, we may have a bigger problem in a couple of generations from now. So
We just need lab grown meat or something to change the game,
yeah,
but we'll see.
yeah. All right, Natalie, this was really a fun conversation, and also a thought-provoking conversation. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and I sincerely hope, and for that matter, I know that the audience will derive immense value from this to get a peek inside how your brain works.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was really great, insightful questions. I'm glad that you've, found a lot of value in my work, and I appreciate you taking the time to ask such thoughtful questions. So yeah, I'm excited to see the interview whenever it comes out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.